Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. In today's lecture, we're going to be talking about observing play. Just a heads up, excuse me, as I mentioned in our previous lecture for this week, you do have exam 1 and discussion 3 coming up next week, so be sure to write that in your calendar and look out for the announcements related to that so you can make sure that you are staying on top of everything. And then at the end of today's lecture, I'm going to briefly touch on the observation tool that you are going to be using for your child observation report in a few weeks. And I'm also going to be creating a separate video for you at the end of this week related to your child observation report, so the assignment guidelines in more detail. So please make sure to take a peek at that one. And then, of course, as always, if you have any questions about anything, make sure to reach out to me ahead of time so that way I can best assist you. And let's get into today's lecture. Okay, let's jump right in. So first, we're going to talk about the purpose of play observation. So observing children's play can help us to achieve three main things. First, play observations can provide valuable information about children's development. So through observing children while they're playing, we can learn about milestones a child currently is able to achieve on their own, as well as figuring out the support from an adult that they are needing while watching them play. So we may observe the ways that children interact with peers, how they interact with objects, and we can also see their construction of knowledge and language skills, emotional regulation, and so much more. And then secondly, we have play observations and how they show teachers where interventions are needed. So in our text, we read about a case study with Willie and how using a play observation tool, we're able to see how teachers take that information from their observation and evaluate areas that a child may need additional support in order to reach higher levels of play, and using a scoring checklist for this. And we're going to talk about this in the next few slides, so stay tuned for that. And then we were able to see that not only were they using the scoring checklist, but they were using observation of the child's play and fixating on patterns and commonly used words and what the child was saying. So we found out that Willie, for example, would use his words when asking for toys, but would also take them at the same time. And then being able to see this pattern in the child's play, the teachers were able to identify areas that he needed improvement in to best interact with others. And then they were able to implement strategies in order to support him. So those are the first two. And then the third observation purpose is to provide additional assessments for children with special needs. So we can use observation tools to see if there's any gaps in children's play, so possibly if there are underlying developmental delays or disabilities. And to be clear, play observation tools don't tell us if children are behind in their learning, nor are they used to accurately diagnose children. However, they are useful in identifying where children are at in their levels of play, as we discussed different types of play in our previous lecture, and using play observations can be helpful in figuring out the next steps and what next observation and assessment tools are needed for children. Okay, so now we're going to talk about guidelines for systematically observing play, and the first one is decide in advance what to observe. So if you take time to figure out what you want to observe in advance, you're more likely to be able to know what observation tools you want to use, appropriate times of day that you want to go observe, and you're not as likely to miss out on valuable information during your observation window. So for example, if you want to look at children's dramatic play and you go in to observe during lunch, you're most likely not going to see dramatic play in action and cooperation between children during that period of time. So if you knew ahead of time, okay, I want to look at dramatic play, then you could plan ahead and say, okay, I'm actually going to be going in at a different time than if you had just went in randomly, and find out what you want to observe first in order to be able to have proper observation tools and know what you're going to look for in children's play. So in dramatic play, am I looking at how children assign roles, or am I looking at the complexity of the language that they use, or their ability to turn take with other children? So it might be even deeper into dramatic play and the behaviors that children are displaying during their dramatic play. And then next, you want to select your appropriate method. So in the upcoming slides, we're going to be looking at different types of play observation tools. So being able to select the appropriate method for your observation will ensure that you are collecting the most valuable data you need to assess children later down the line. And then next, you want to observe when you can see a full range of a child's abilities. So it's best to be able to gather a well-rounded observation during your time frame, and this might not happen in one time. So looking at the next ones, you might have to get to know children a little bit and observe over extended period of time, so they kind of go hand in hand. So for example, an appropriate time of play for that child to be able to see their full range of abilities might be at the peak of dramatic play, when they're planning their ideas and implementing and actively engaged with others. And if I come at the end during cleanup time, I might not be able to see a full range of their abilities. Or if a child plays better when they're outside, I might not be able to see a full range of their abilities if I'm observing them during indoor play. So just some things to consider. Also thinking about, what areas children are interested in. So maybe I'm observing during a structured activity where children are playing with Play-Doh, and the child that I'm observing isn't as interested in the Play-Doh, and then I come back later on and they're in the block area and they're having full-on conversations, they're creating, they're building. So being able to have a full range of the child's abilities can help you to better assess them and understand who they are as individuals. And then, of course, delay observations until children are familiar. So as I was saying, if you don't know the child very well, or you don't go over an extended period of time, you might not be able to see a full range of abilities. And same with if you're observing in the classroom, for example. Not every place of observation allows you to step outside and still be able to see the children or have an observation room. So you may be going in when children are seeing you and it might be intimidating for them, or they're focused on you and curious on what you're doing, and then they're not able to be involved in their play. So just think about, if you get to know a child over time, what play skills you might see evolve as they get more comfortable, or, if it's the first day of the school year and the child is new in the classroom, how their play skills might progress towards the end of the semester once they've built relationships with their teachers and they've built relationship with their peers, they're comfortable and familiar with their environment. So a lot of factors might come into play in what you're observing. And then, of course, like I said, observe over an extended period of time. So just being able to get the full range of understanding the child better and evaluating their play space, their style of play, the way they interact with others, their preferred type of play. So those are the different ways that we want to kind of think about, okay, these are things I might need to know before I go in and observe. And then in the next slides, we're going to talk about some different studies and different tools that you might use to observe children's play. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly mention this, and please take a peek at this video. So this is the Timpani toy study, and it's a pretty short video, but it's quite interesting, and it checks out how teachers are evaluating children's play through the observation of their use of toys. So they look at how toys impact children's development, and they use a variety of different toys, such as loose parts and dramatic play toys and water toys and a bunch of other toys, and they see, okay, what are children doing with the toys? What knowledge are they constructing? How are they creating meaning with their play? And how does play with certain types of toys help them to increase their development? So they're using a scoring system on the highest moments of children's play with certain toys, and looking at what are children doing with the toys, how are they exploring the toys, so are they using problem solving skills, are they being creative and building, are they exploring mathematics, are they engaging in dramatic play or games with rules, different types of social play? Are they asking questions? So all different things that they're looking at specifically with different toys as their lens. So take a peek at that and see what your thoughts are after you watch it. Okay, so now I just want to briefly talk about different structured observation methods. And on this slide, it's going to be about the checklist. And then on the next two slides, we're going to look at two different rating scales as another form of observation. So first, we're looking at Smilansky. Ooh, I practiced it a couple times before and had to redo the video, and every time I go to record, I say it incorrectly, and then when I pause to practice, I say it correctly, so we're just going to roll with it. I always feel that when I'm reading things and then say them out loud, it's a little bit different, but as I was saying, Smilansky's sociodramatic play inventory, which is talked about in chapter 2, it looks at different forms of sociodramatic play. So imitative role play, make-believe in regard to objects, make-believe in regard to actions and situations, interactions, verbal communication, and persistence. So using these various categories can help observers to evaluate the complexity of children's sociodramatic play. And just as a reminder from our previous lecture, as children expand their symbolic representation, noted from Piaget and from Vygotsky, we can see the formation of the highest level of play during their sociodramatic play. So this is just one of the forms of checklist that you might be using in order to understand the complexity of children's sociodramatic play. And then we have Rubin's play observation scale, so the POS scale, and this play scale looks at play behaviors, so children's play behaviors in different types of social play suggested by Parton, such as their solitary play, their parallel play, or their play in groups with other children. And we may see different behaviors such as exploration, functional, dramatic, and games while children are playing. And this tool can be used for both structured and unstructured play. And we also see notions in this play scale of Smilansky's sociodramatic components based on how children are developing using their cognitive skills. And this play scale also looks at different variables such as children's age and their gender and the complexity of their play. So next, we're going to talk about different observation methods using rating scales, and these are two forms of checklists. Okay, as I mentioned in the previous slide, this is our first structured observation method rating scale, so the Penn Interactive Peer Play Scale, or I like to call it the PIPS. And this rating scale, it looks at the frequency of children's behaviors. So again, another behavioral scale, but specifically this one is assessing children's social play in order to figure out their likeness along others. So am I liked by other peers? How do I play with other peers? And the categories that children are observed in within this play scale are play interaction, play disruption, and play disconnection. And during the observation, the dimensions are used with a rating scale, a Likert scale, and starting with not observed to very frequent. So are you seeing a pattern in children's play with the different dimensions? What does that look like? So the PIPS rating scale is useful in supporting children and can provide insight for teachers on areas that children might be struggling with. So are they having a hard time building relationships with other children? Are they struggling to interact in peer settings? And we can also see that scales like this can be used to support not only children inside the classroom, but can be a useful tool for speaking with parents and families about how children are playing with others. And you can see on the article here if you want to read a little bit more about the PIPS rating scale. And then on the next slide, we're going to be talking about the second rating scale. Okay, so the second observation rating scale is Barnett's Children's Playfulness Scale, or the CPS scale. And just like the PIPS one, this is also another Likert rating scale, but instead of play behaviors, we're looking at the behaviors that constitute the meaning of play for children. So we see the perspectives from children's joy, such as their level of enthusiasm, to their cognitive spontaneity, such as if they're creating their own games during their play. And I just want you to keep in mind that using a rating scale in one sitting may not provide you with a full, well-rounded observation of a child. So you might want to reflect back on the guidelines of observing play to see, okay, do I need to take more time over an extended period to observe a child, or do I need to get familiar with them? And do they need to get familiar with others? Same with, if we're looking at their play skills and how they play and interact with others, does this child need extra time in the morning to get comfortable with their peers? Is this their first time being in a classroom setting? Am I seeing their full range of abilities? Am I observing the child's joy during an activity that they like, or is it a planned out activity that's not pertaining to their interests? So those are just some additional factors to consider when you're using rating scales. So reflecting back on those guidelines can help you to better assess children and effectively plan time for observing. And then on the next slide, we're going to be talking about some unstructured observation methods, and then finally we're going to get into the play checklist. Okay, so some unstructured observation methods where you're not going to be using specific tools as your measures are antecedent records, running records, video recordings, and work samples. And your text talks about a few others, but these are the main ones that we're going to focus on for today. So first, let's look at antecedent records. And just to put out there, just like other observation tools, teachers can use more informal ways like these ones to observe children and to collect data and then assess them. So antecedent records, these are basically just brief notes or short stories that teachers can take about children, or specifically a child, in one setting. So antecedent records, they don't have a specific intention, or you're not looking for something specific when you go in to do them. They could be done on the spot, but it's really just a quick note. And imagine it like you're doing a small journal entry, just jotting down what you observe, and it happens in separate notes. So I might write down, that a child is drawing on a piece of paper, and then in a next note I might write down what they said. So writing lots of different separate notes, and then I can use those later on as an observation method to figure out, okay, what other observation tools might I want to use? Or it can be an additive to an additional play scale that I might use, and then I have more observation notes. And antecedent records can be a great way for you to gather information, where you can informally discuss with families what's going on and just get some quick notes. Maybe you took some that day, the family had asked you, hey, do you notice this at school? So you can take a few quick notes unstructured and informally. And then we have running records, and running records are like an extension of an antecedent record. So this is when you really step away from the children's play and allow them to engage, and you're writing down everything in as much detail as possible. So unlike the antecedent records, the running records are a series of events taking place during the entire note-taking process. So this means you're putting a timestamp on each individual aspect of what you're observing. And for the running records, it's really ideal to do them in increments, a few minutes at a time, so that you can get as much information as possible. And just a note, we want to remember that all forms of note-taking that we're doing, they should include factual, so our objective information, and we really should be leaving out any opinions, personal feelings, or assumptions about children, and this is subjective. So we want to be objective and not subjective. And then we have our video records. So video records, they really allow you to capture the live actions of children's day-to-day interactions and play, and really anything that you want. You could plan them out, or they could be unplanned, and you can use video recordings to evaluate children's play in combination with play checklists. So that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be using the play checklist and watching a video. And the beauty of video recordings is that they allow you to see things more than once. So, you think about when you're watching movies or TV, the first time that you see them, you might not notice everything. And then maybe you watch it again for the second time and you notice things that you didn't notice before, and then the third time. So it gives you the ability through those video recordings to not only capture quick conversations that might happen that you miss, or rapid changes of play, because children might be switching from one role to another, and that might be hard to capture if you're doing a running record. And we can see things that we might miss or overlook when we're observing in real time. So video recording allows us as observers to watch from different viewpoints and refocus our attention on different children at different times. And then last but not least, we have work samples. So using work samples, whether it's a physical copy or, in the form of a picture, this can be a great way for teachers to see really the construction of how a child's play came to be. So we can use work samples to tell a story and get an insight onto a child's thinking and creativity, as well as their ability to plan, and it gives us insight into other skills such as, fine motor development or persistence. And then just like other forms of unstructured observation methods, we could use work samples to share with families what's going on and show the creative mind and the learning process of their child. Okay, so I mentioned this at the beginning of our lecture, the Pathways to Play checklist, and I just wanted to briefly touch on it. So the Pathways to Play checklist is in your textbook, and we're going to be using this play checklist as part of your observation report coming up later on in the semester. And this is a tool used for children's sociodramatic play and helps us to evaluate their highest level of play skills in order to see what they can do on their own and what areas they need support in from adults. So the case study that I mentioned earlier, that was using the Pathways to Play checklist. And again, it's all in your text, so please make sure that you go and revisit this if you're unclear on how it's used. Your text breaks it down into great detail and gives you explanations on all of the different sections and the checklist items. So again, please just make sure you review this. I will be going over it in a bit more detail, and I'm going to be creating an assignment guidelines video all about the child observation report. So stay tuned for that, and we'll get into this a bit later on. And that's all I have for you today, and I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. And next we're going to be touching on evaluating children's play.